Everybody, welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. We're going to be doing a confrontational polemic tonight. We're going to be doing a polemic on the issue of abortion, and specifically with Steven Crowder's position on abortion, because it's not just that he's imprecise on the issue of abortion. It is that he's attacking the biblical position on abortion, and that is why this polemic is necessary. And we are not only live on YouTube, but I believe we're also live on the Twitter sphere for the first time ever. So that is fun. So we're going to be doing a polemic on Steven Crowder's pro-life feminism. Pro-life feminism is an abomination to the pro-life movement. It really is. It is something that obfuscates and pushes away the correct biblical position on abortion. And that's just not something that we can really tolerate as a movement. And the reason, so we're going to be doing a live stream tonight and going through specifically his comments and how his comments actually attack the biblical position on abortion to advance a softer, more palatable version. And I already see in the comments, Louisiana got the abortion abolition bill, and we're going to be talking about that as well. We're also going to be talking about a 2019 Texas bill of similar proportions, which just goes to show how wrong Steven Crowder is on this issue. And I'm going to introduce my guest here, Anthony, who also writes for evangelicaldarkweb.org. Check that site out. Get on that RSS feed. That's completely free. And if you actually want to support this program on a regular basis, you can become a Patreon subscriber, because Patreon censors. We don't use Patreon, and Patreon definitely censors pro-life content. I believe that's been the case in the past. So we don't use Patreon. We use our own. We built our own thing, but otherwise, we'll be happy to take chats as well. This is an ongoing discussion. So, introduce yourself, and you wrote the article that started this process. So talk about that.
Oh, that I did. So this was kind of a couple weeks in the making, because I took a whole week off from writing articles because everything I'm working on is like super long. So I got an article about, I call it the Base Manifesto, which is the follow-up to the anti-feminist manifesto. So, and ironically, I actually name dropped Steven Crowder in that article, without publishing, or before I even wrote this one. So that kind of had me on the hook, or had him kind of in my sights, even though I do like him. So again, all this.
Yeah, I like Steven Crowder as well.
We are saying
polemic that we're doing here.
Yeah, constructive criticism, right?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a constructive polemic, because he did lie about the correct pro-life position. He did lie and say that our position on abortion does not exist. And it's a lie. And, the Louisiana bill just shows that. And we're going to go through that a little bit later, how his gatekeeping on what is within the pro-life movement is wrong. So you've had this in mind to write about for a while.
Yes, because I actually, a lot of the scripture I use in the article, or reference in the articles, is I basically go with the Romans 1 natural revelation, being, basically condemning you in your sin for committing an abortion because you know what you're doing. So that's all in the article, and that was actually in the other article I was writing as well, basically saying that the Romans 1 condemns you of your sin. And again, I'm a firm believer that, let's say 90% of sins we can objectively define as bad and identify without even using the Bible, because they reap negative consequences both on the society at whole and the individual. We know that murder is wrong because you're taking a life.
Yeah, and it's self-evident.
Yes.
And natural revelation proves that. If you look at the Old Testament law, it's not exhaustive on everything that's a sin. And Jesus makes that abundantly clear when in the New Testament, he gives the Sermon on the Mount, and he's not necessarily raising the standard. He's showing us how high the standard already was.
Well,
yes, you can't do these things, but it's also your motivation. It's your heart that condemns you.
Well, it's your heart. Your heart is the reason you need a savior. So even though, your heart's desire to commit murder is why you need a savior. That's why you are guilty of sin. of course, obviously, the cycle of sin, the progression of sin is that one sin leads to another, and then the spiral increasingly escalates to worse sin. But the very heart, just your desire, is why you require a savior.
Yes. Give me a second. I'm going to publish the article. I kind of wanted to wait until after the stream, but we did have a request in the chat for a link. I like to publish articles at 7 o'clock in the morning because I feel like that's the optimal time for an article publish. But an exception can certainly be made, especially as the RSS feed and all that other stuff. So let me. So you give me like 30 seconds so I can get an image on this article. Okay. All right, I got a image. Let's do this. So article is live now on evangelicaldarkweb.org. And we could go through the article, but we're kind of going to go through the background of what's in the article. Oh, crap. Let me change this up. I hate when I publish like this. Yeah, continue buying me some time here.
All right. So, I mean,
so when was the Steven Crowder comments that kind of spurred you into this article?
This was the day after. I mean, this was the Tuesday show. This was the day after the Samuel Alito thing broke. So that broke overnight, and obviously everyone was going to talk about the Roe v. Wade overruling. Which, let me just say off the bat, I'm honestly shocked because I thought this would have been Roberts that wrote it, or this would have been Kavanaugh, or Gorsuch would have written the majority opinion, and that John Roberts would have been on the majority and thus sabotaging it. So yeah, I'm actually
that's actually the biggest shock about this.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Alito, I mean, his nickname was Scalito because he was essentially like a miniature version of Samuel or of Antonin Scalia.
And okay, I'm just about to publish the article. I accidentally published it on a past date because I hate when you have a draft and it kind of the permalink was wrong. So we want that permalink to be correct, and it is taking forever to update here.
So, and of course, you know, with everyone, that was the news cycle and really still is the news cycle for all things pertaining to American society because, you know, you can't keep people focused on Ukraine for very long. And
no, you can't because at the end of the day, people don't actually care that much.
And let's be real, the Democrats need something to motivate their base because, you know, inflation isn't going to do it. So you have to, and, you know, there's not really a racial incident as of right now to drum up support. So thus they got to go back to the war on women, you know?
Yeah, it's a classic narrative. All right. It should be publishing. So while that happens, as I eagerly await, because it shouldn't take that long, let's actually dive into the content that no, the article chat. The article was going to be published in tandem with this stream. So I like to publish articles at 7 o'clock in the morning because that's like the best time to like publish articles in my opinion. So, but I will publish it tonight right now during the stream. And we can actually first question, let's actually talk about the leaking of SCOTUS decision. Do you care about that?
No, personally, no. I'm okay taking the good news now. And again, I thought this would be a far worse decision. So this is good news in my world. And again, you know, not to say game recognized game, but, you know, I understand what the Democrats are doing. And, you know, I'm not going to hate the strategy. I mean, you know, if Donald Trump was more inclined to leak information that would be negative towards his opponents, particularly an investigation into a certain presidential candidate's son and his degenerate behavior, then, you know, things might be different. So again, all's fair in politics. I understand the game. I'm not going to complain about good news.
Yeah, so, I don't think we should complain about good news either.
And I
Uh,
don't, and I don't want to hear the my hypocrisy or my law and order talking points. Let's talk about what this ruling means, the implications of it, and again, what are the next steps for the
so
movement?
Russell Moore, it's not his most recent article. I think his most recent article is kind of like, again, the womb to tomb pro-life subversion. But Russell Moore published an article right after the thing that talked about how this is destroying our trust in the institutions and how the Supreme Court is a sacred institution. I was at a Republican meeting on Tuesday, and they're just talking about how unacceptable it was that this would leak from the Supreme Court. And these people just don't get it. Russell Moore purposely doesn't get it. But I think the Republicans, the well-meaning Republicans, granted, I think some of them were kind of rhinos, but we can talk about that later. The Supreme Court is a political institution and always has been. We just don't understand that. We kind of think that this is some posh legal institution. It's not. It never has been. Ever since they decided that judicial review was under their purview, they stepped into politics. They stepped into a realm that they were not constitutionally obliged to be in. They assumed a power. They are a political institution. Supreme Court justices are politicians. They should be viewed as politicians. And the Republicans don't seem to get this. And that's
So
why
even the
yeah.
case that Marbury versus Madison was basically predicated under the guise that the courts are a political institution because it was about the Congress trying to legislate more favorable courts. And of course, Marbury was the appointed, represented the appointed judge that basically Jefferson came in and it's just like, yeah, we're not going to honor this appointment just because it's dated before my time. And that became the basis for the lawsuit. So, I mean, it was basic, but the whole lawsuit is predicated on the notion that the courts are a political institution. If you can stack the courts with judges in your favor, then you can attain political power. So,
I mean, FDR knew this well when he threatened justices on the Supreme Court. He knew that. And the first judge that he would put on, I believe, was a vote in Roe v. Wade, actually. Funny how it is. I still can't get this article published. Okay, it's going live in 1 minute if this works. There we go. All right, it's live, or it should be in like 1 minute. So, and then I'll link it in the chat. So back to what we were saying. Let's actually go through the Steven Crowder clip, and this is from Tuesday's show. I believe I did pull up the timestamps. It is behind the paywall. Let me read this comment. I just don't believe that the majority of justices actually care about Roe v. Wade enough to do this. There seems to be something more nefarious behind all of this. I feel like if you are nominated to the Supreme Court, you already have a solidified position on this. They
I
are
feel like
nominating people to the Supreme Court because they have a position on this and that there's an expected outcome if you're on the Supreme Court.
well, I feel like you're MS blackpilled in the wrong direction. Like this is the one thing they give you after they've screwed you on COVID like numerous times. Oh, the vaccine mandates, that's okay.
Daniel Horowitz made
If
that
Congress had wanted to legislate a vaccine mandate, they could have legislated one. Not that they don't have the ability to legislate one. If you read the per curiam decision, or particularly the concurring opinion by Neil Gorsuch, that's what it said, is that if Congress wanted to mandate it, they could have. And he didn't seem to imply any notion of the fact that they can't mandate it. So that was one thing in particular, like that's one finding. So again, I mean, this is like the one win we get, and again, that's why it's more glory to God than glory to man, because
yeah, I completely agree with that. So I got Steven Crowder pulled up on the screen right here. So let me know if this is too loud. I think it might be a little too loud. So let's just roll tape. And no, this is not a copyright. This is fair use because we are adding commentary.
I can't hear it.
Wait, you can't hear it?
If you press play, I try it again.
Yeah, okay. Let me actually.
But yeah, it's behind the paywall, and it's like when they start taking chat, and that just made me like, what the heck?
All right. You're able to hear this, right?
No, I can't hear it.
And this is wait. Okay, so this should work. I don't know why it's not. Video, audio, all right, let's try a different tactic.
And obviously, the European is
All right, I'm gonna play
gag
it.
name.
Hold on.
Have no conscience. Well, that's actually an interesting question, because this brings up the idea. A lot of people say, "Oh, so if you want to outlaw abortion, which is not what's happening with Roe v. Wade, but let's say that abortion were actually."
And just pause right there. So,
Yeah.
like, that's the first mistake, and he makes this mistake probably about 15 minutes earlier, because, again, the overturning of Roe v. Wade would initiate a slew of trigger laws that have been passed by red states, particularly that would essentially outlaw abortion upon the overturn of Roe v. Wade. So, right off the bat, he kind of assumes that the most extreme would be heartbeat bills, and the most extreme on the left would be the 9-month plus abortion. So that's the first mistake that he makes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the states that have trigger laws, like this would actually be a huge win because states like Wisconsin and Michigan have such laws.
Well, no, they just have laws in the books, I thought, from decades past.
Yeah, exactly. But
And
these are
then-
states that the Republicans, I don't believe they have a trifecta in. Well, they certainly don't have in Michigan. So this would be a huge ground gain that then the Republicans would have to defend rather than have to climb the mountain. So let's just keep rolling tape here.
The most extreme people believe that, the most extreme version of the right believe that abortion should be illegal because they believe it's terminating a life. Okay. Now, I agree with the idea that abortion is terminating a life, and I do think that it should be illegal. Okay. That being said, I've never heard anyone talk about prosecuting the women. They've talked about prosecuting the doctors who repeatedly perform abortions, and we've included some quotes from doctors in the past who've said that they know they're terminating a life. They don't care.
So this is a lie.
Yeah, I mean,
this is a straight up lie.
And that's why I decried it as myth number 3. That was
myth number 3 because that was basically like the second thing that we stopped and criticized, and that's myth number 3.
Yeah. Oh, the first one was that women being the victims. That's myth number 1. Myth number 2 is that they're ignorant. They're acting in ignorant. And myth number 3 was that the women.
No one actually wants to call that out.
Which is which is basically a straw man, like building a non-existent straw man, I guess.
But
I mean, technically, if you're like a theonomist, then absolutely you're in the same boat.
And just if you're in the chat, let me know. There's no echo on the audio, is there? I'm gonna continue playing because let's keep rolling tape. We got 6 minutes of this, if I recall.
Colorado, in that segment that we did, you can read the quotes. I got flipped off by that guy. Yeah, he was a real ass. But no one's talking about prosecuting the women because we understand, unfortunately, that women are lied to. Most women getting an abortion don't know. They don't see it. They don't see it, and that's why the left lost their mind when states had ultrasound bills, which just mean that before you have an abortion, you have to conduct an ultrasound. Why? Well, look, that's basically education. It's an ultrasound. See what it is that you're dismembering and sucking down a tube, because they know that when the truth is brought to light, more women would change their minds. And you know what? I'd be curious to see women in the chat who've had a baby, who had your first ultrasound, when you saw the heartbeat. What was that like for you? Because the most extreme abortion pills are heartbeat pills. Did it change your perspective? Was there any doubt in your mind as a mother when you saw another heartbeat?
So let's pause right there. Let's pause right there because the most extreme bills are only heartbeat bills. That's a lie too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The trigger laws that are in effect, and then of course, you know,
There are the
Louisiana.
trigger laws. There are in 2019, Texas, his state, Texas, had an abolish abortion bill. It was opposed by guess who? Abby Johnson. Abby Johnson opposed that bill. And she's touted as one of the biggest names in pro-life activism. So it's insane. And Steven Crowder, again, if you look at his most popular videos, some of them have got to be "I'm pro-life, change my mind."
Yeah, and in that one
Probably has like 30 million views.
And I generally do commend a lot of that because
I do. But this is a position that he maintained during those conversations. So this isn't like we're cherry picking him on a bad day or him misspeaking. This is something he's consistently said.
Well, I mean, his premise, he goes in a lot at that time. I mean, since people don't have like the prenatal charts in front of them, they're probably unaware of what each stage is. But I don't think the lack of understanding of the natal development negates the fact that they know that they are killing a life.
Innovation HQ says, don't call yourself pro-life if you don't support capital punishment for women who have an abortion. So, again, that goes back to how much God values human life, that if you shed innocent blood, your innocent or your not so innocent blood will be shed. And by man will your blood be shed. That means we are charged with executing a form of vengeance or justice here on earth. We have that responsibility. That is the purpose of government, really, because they consider like the government dispensation begins in Genesis 9. If you're a dispensationalist, which I'm not, but this is where the foundation of government begins in the Bible. So it just goes, and that's the purpose, to execute murderers.
That was a life, and that's why they don't want ultrasound. So no one's talking about prosecuting women. They're talking about the doctors. And so, yes, I think there are a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of people who don't know what abortion is, unfortunately.
It is an extreme case argument. But if you are saying, do you have no compassion, do you have no sympathy, that I would ask the same of you. Because you don't know what's happened to the girl. You don't know the age of her. You don't know if she's been beaten. You don't know if she's been raped. And I'm saying again, this is, again, an extreme side, the same as but I don't see it as the extreme side of 9 months. That's batshit crazy to me.
But that's not extreme. That's mainstream with the left. That's the thing.
Exactly. The problem is extremism is mainstream.
Yes.
And I don't, as weird as it sounds, I don't think you should fight extremism with extremism. I think it's a bad look. Mm-hmm. I think that it's good to stick to your morals that make sense to you, not just jump on the complete other side as far as you can possibly go, just because this side's acting erratic.
Yeah.
So, again, Dave Landau, who's a comedian, who's like a co-host on Steve Louder Crowder, we're not really going to dive into him because he's not claiming to be... He doesn't do "I'm pro-life, change my mind" videos. He doesn't do where in Scripture are humans responsible. It's Genesis 9.
Noah's getting off the ark, and
it's the covenant that they receive in Genesis 9. And death penalty for murderers is the only Old Testament law. Is the only law of Moses that's in each of the 5 law books in the Old Testament. So it's in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So death penalty for murder is in all 5 of those books. I believe it's the only law in all 5 of those books. So it's a pretty big deal if it's mentioned 5 times like that. And of course, Romans 13, you get into the executor, avenging angel. So there is that component to it as well. And bearing the sword not in vain. So again, the sword is the sword. That means the sword. So we're not really trying to bash Dave Landau. We're not really doing a polemic on Dave Landau because he's a moderate by his own self-profession, whereas Steven Crowder does claim to be a pro-life activist. And then we're going to watch a video by Jeff Durbin just showing, again, how he's wrong, because I don't think we can overkill this enough.
Well, the thing is, I don't think the issue here is the left has changed so much, whereas the right has not. So this is a good example where when people talk about,
I would say they have a bit.
well, not on the issue of abortion. So I'm talking about the issue of abortion. But when people say, "Oh, the right's gone for the right, and the left's gone," no, actually, both the right and the left
I
have
don't
gone
think they've gone for the right. I meant this particular question.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to pause right here because, again, this is false. This is a myth. The right has moved further to the right on some issues. I wrote an entire article about this, talking about how Elon Musk has not actually left the left. The left did not leave Elon Musk. And the premise of the article was that these people, and Dave Landau would probably be included in this, they got on a roller coaster, right? They got on the roller coaster of liberalism. And they are at the top of the roller coaster. Now they're all going down the roller coaster. They see at the bottom of the roller coaster hill is a fire, is death. Basically, they're going to crash and die. And now they want off the ride. That's what's going on here. And again, in that article that I wrote, I published it. I might do a video essay on that because it was a pretty good article, but I did not have time to do a video on it when I wrote it. But that article, basically, that's the premise of the article, is that these people adopted liberalism for several years, and now all of a sudden they see the fruit of liberalism and they want off the ride because they see how bad it is. And the argument that one of the examples I use, I forget whether I use an abortion example, but I use transgenderism as an example. And you look at supporting transgender youth is in the Democrat Party platform in 2012. It's in their platform. It was their position to transgender children, which is implicit at least. Explicitly support, depending on how you define supporting transgender children, depending on how you define that, it was in their platform. So at most, it means full-on transgendering children, puberty blockers, everything. That was in their platform in 2012, so nearly 10 years ago. And at minimum, just acknowledging the fact that children can choose their own gender. So it was these were mainstream Democrat positions. And
it's also like Dr. Oz's videotape episode was like 10
I think I might
ago.
go a little bit on the Blaze as well. The Dave Rubin trying to say that it's anti-gay, transgenderism's anti-gay, and it's just like, you are nonsense. You had no problem with it. You had no problem with transgenderism until like 7 years after your movement acknowledged transgenderism. I don't even know when that was, and versus when Dave Rubin Dave Rubin decided to make a famous video about leaving the left in 2017. So let's continue because Crowder's got more.
Yeah. So in this question, the right has been entirely consistent. Nothing has changed where they believe that life begins at, sometimes they use the term conception, fertilization. Now, why this has been consistent with biological textbooks? Because conservatives understand that you are now dealing with a new genetic code, new DNA that is autonomous from the mother and the father. And if you commit an abortion, you're ending that forever. Period. That's not the mom's DNA. It's not the dad's DNA. The
who's committing the abortion?
Right? Is now gone. So that's always been the position of the right, whether people agree with it or not. The left, however, remember.
So I'm going to pause right there because that has not always been the position of the right. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, certainly. I mean, the right spent, okay, we got to get judges in to overturn Roe, and then the 90s came, and then that was the rise of what I guess we'll derisively call the big baby, which is, keep
the pro-life industry.
Yeah, the pro-life industry.
Big baby.
So, I mean, that kind of dominated the 90s and early 2000s.
Well, I mean, we didn't get real pro-life legislation until the last few years.
No. I mean, it wasn't really a push because they just thought, okay, if we just get enough judges, we'll get the Supreme Court.
And I would argue that it was a generational change, that a bunch of boomers started dying off, or not even boomers, like the previous generation before the boomers, like Joe Biden's generation, they started dying off. And then you have this new breed of Gen Xers taking more prominent roles, not millennials, but Gen Xers, the most conservative generation alive in America, I would say. And their politicians, like Ron DeSantis is a Gen Xer, for example. Their politicians said, we're going to abolish abortion. We grew up with the moral majority. We grew up with Ronald Reagan. Now we're going to take this to the next level. And that's what's happened. The Republican Party has moved to the right on abortion. They've moved towards the logical conclusion of the belief that life begins at conception instead of pretending that it doesn't, which is what Mitt Romney's generation did. Donald Trump was pretty largely not there for most of his life. So I think there's a lot of generational factors, and it's becoming increasingly untenable to be a pro-abortion Republican. They exist, like Mitt Romney, and even Mitt Romney tweeted his support for the Alito draft because he's that much of a chameleon. But
I don't even
anyway,
know that. I honestly
he had a
thought he would.
statement. Again, you know who else is silent? Tim Keller. I don't know how much. Yeah.
I mean, Mitt Romney's pretty petulant, so.
Yeah. Mitt Romney's terrible. Always has been, always will be. Now, there is some more stuff that we can share. And again, I keep thinking that we can, I don't know why my screen sharing technology isn't working. I guess it's a restream issue. Or maybe I should use OBS when I do this. But there is another video to show. So actually I have a few more YouTube videos. So let me pull it up. So first, let's talk about this. This is a historic bill from Louisiana this is the Texas bill. This came out in 2019. This was opposed by Abby Johnson. And I believe 2019 was the same year that Unplanned came out. So this was a bill that she opposed. It did not come to fruition.
Unsurprising.
But it would have, not surprising, because Big Baby is alive in Texas. Here we have the Louisiana bill, which made it out of committee, so it is going to go to the floor of the Louisiana House. And this bill is a human personhood of the unborn child at all stages of life, and ensures the right and laws that apply to other human beings include unborn babies. This means aborting babies would be an act of homicide under the law. That's based. The taking of human of life is murder, and illegal Louisiana law currently fails to provide equal protection for human life. And again, this law basically says that to get an abortion are committing the murder.
They'll point out the one quote.
Okay. So here's the line that you wanted pointed out. The pro-life movement opposes punishing mothers too, instead viewing them as second villains of the abortion industry. Pregnant mothers frequently are coerced or forced into aborting their babies, or lied to and manipulated by abortion workers. Historically, when most states banned abortion before Roe v. Wade, women were not persecuted for abortions. It's not clear if the bill will pass, and it's basically saying that the bill would punish mothers. And Life News, what would you say that Life News is doing with that commentary or context they're providing?
It's weird because it's not grammatically proper at all, so I don't know if it was a last second adjustment or they copied and pasted it into the thing. Obviously, I don't
you don't need
the historical part,
too.
but I did finish the article with a quote from the Alito decision where basically the criminalizing abortion is part of the American tradition. That's part of our common law. I think Alito even goes back to the colonial days with the Massachusetts charter. So he goes back in time before America was even founded.
Let's listen to a episode of, it's from Right Response Ministries, which is really based. I like Right Response Ministries, especially when you look at Joel Weben, or is it Weben, who did a response. Who talked about how his church responded to COVID and how he believed that he was wrong, and just to hear some self-awareness out of that, really nice. Let me tell you, it's really nice to hear a pastor admit that they were wrong on COVID and then make corrective action.
It's one of those areas where things like we've been worked on by our culture. We've been taught too. The culture has done a better job of discipling Christians than Christians have done discipling Christians in many points. And when you think about even the issue that you're referring to, the issue of, if we could just convince the mother that it's a baby, if we could just convince the world that biologically this is a human life from the moment of conception, you have to recognize that it was never the issue, biology. It was never a biological issue. It was always a moral issue.
Right.
It was always an issue of sin. And I said that before the legislature in Colorado, when I was testifying on behalf of the bill that we got into criminalize and abolish abortion there. I brought up that point sort of as a passing point. This is incontrovertible. It's human life from conception. There's no way to dispute that. I went through a few examples and I said, this isn't a biological question. It's a moral question. This is a moral question you're dealing with right now. It's ethical. And so, just to your point in terms of the woman and what does she know, I always try to keep this as simple as possible. Number one, yes, Pastor Joel, you're exactly right. The word of God is very clear. They know, and they know what they're doing. However, to the person who says, she doesn't really understand what she's doing and what's inside her womb, I would say you haven't spent a lot of time outside of an abortion mill, have you?
So let's pause right there. Again, I don't know.
Now, I originally watched this like a couple weeks back. So when I heard Crowder say that, this video immediately came to mind. And I like Jeff Durbin because, he's actually I think he was actually on the ground or his people were on the ground in Louisiana advocating for that bill. So and of course they were doing a similar one in Colorado. So like he is like the, I guess, authentic anti-abortion ministry, lobbying organization, hybrid, I guess. And of course, I include him in the article because he's the expert opinion. And again, I already established a case of, Romans 1, you're not excused. You can't, you're not excused in your ignorance.
It might be an appeal to authority fallacy, but if you're appealing to an authority like Jeff Durbin to prove that an idea isn't as fringe as Steven Crowder ignores, he doesn't imply that the idea is fringe. He ignores its existence, despite the fact that there have been multiple bills in state houses that disprove his entire argument.
Well, I begin the myth number 2, women do not know what they're doing, with ignorance is not an excuse of the law. And then from there, it goes into a pro-life, or it goes into the more or less Romans 1. Like, what menstruation is, what pregnancy is, what sex is, what sex leads to.
Something I want to point out is that Steven Crowder does claim to be Christian, which is why I feel more comfortable approaching this and using the fact that using Jeff Durbin, for example, what he's saying, because first of all, he's a subject matter expert on abortion activism, anti-abortion activism. Second of all, because he's been to these places. Second of all, the moral idea that women don't know what they're doing is flat out unbiblical. You think God will not count that as a sin when sending someone to hell? Oh, you think that's not going to be on their sin tab that they aborted their own child? Who can make that argument? And so I went after what's her name? Karen Swallow Pryor, who made the argument that we shouldn't be using the word murder. We shouldn't be calling women who get abortions murderers. And, just listen what Jeff is about to say right now. So I pull it back up on the stream.
Because people who have wouldn't say something like that. Because I can tell you that not only myself, but our team at Apologia and all the Christian churches across the country who go out regularly and save lives at the abortion mill, literally on a daily basis, we know that's not the case. We have countless stories of daily mothers and fathers going in and bragging about the fact that they're going to kill their child, acknowledging, yes, I know it's my baby, I don't want it, or they'll go in and say things, we'll say, we'll adopt your child, we'll pay for everything. And they'll say, I couldn't give my baby up for adoption. And then they'll go in and they kill their child. But I think one of the greatest indications that they know exactly what they're doing is the fact that they are going into an abortion mill.
Oh.
For what reason? Why would somebody go into an abortion mill to get a surgery? Because they know that there is something growing inside of them that is their baby. I mean, the people that go in there, they're not ignorant. 18-year-old women, 25-year-old women, 40-year-old women, they go in there, They know what sex produces. They know what they're accomplishing. They know what they're carrying. Their mothers, their fathers, they know it. The issue isn't biological; it is ethical. Now, that's not to say, and this is what God's law would preserve, by the way, if we had it employed rightly. It's not to say that there aren't women who are pressured into abortion who are themselves victims. So, number one, a woman who goes into an abortion mill to kill her child, who pays an assassin to kill her child, is not a victim. We need to stop treating them as victims. God calls that an abomination. When you justify the wicked, when you acquit the guilty, that's an abomination to God. It's sinful. It's wrong. So when the pro-life establishment says that, she's a victim too, they're perverting justice. They're sinning against God. That's an evil. It's protecting abortion. She is not a victim. She knows what she's doing. And so we need to stop saying that the guilty are not really guilty, because we somehow want to be super gracious. The way to be gracious is to call sin sin and to point them to the only hope that they have, and that's in Jesus Christ. Forgiveness and peace is only possible for the guilty.
Right. Real quick.
I think that's the end of the quote.
I think that's the end of the quote.
Because they speak on like 4 minute
they
at
go
a time.
back and forth. But I do got one more clip though. Since we're going into overkill, this is going into overkill on this terrible pro-life feminism. We're going to kill this, or not to use an abortion as a pun, but
well, and part of what I do in like the myth too, because myth one is that they're not victims, and that's simply because it doesn't matter if someone sinned against you, i.e., the rape case. That's one transaction. That doesn't, being abused doesn't give you the right to abuse someone else.
It's such a human response to repay evil with evil. If evil is inflicted on you, you then inflict evil on others. And I'll use like school shootings as an example where, yes, an evil act happened, but if your response is to then take away guns from other people, you are then committing evil in response to evil, and that is evil, of course. So what do you think about this comment from Thomas? Pro-life versus smash mouth incrementalism versus abolitionism. Actually, it was a comment before that I kind of wanted to comment on. Actually, was abolitionists probably got the pro-life movement moving. What do you think about that comment?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, it goes back to the Gen X, the new generation that said, hey, we actually want to end this and make some noise on the local level.
Kind of a part of that too, as well. But yeah, it's a generational shift.
Because your typical pro-life might dilute the movement with womb to tomb arguments, or they might just say we just got to appoint enough judges, versus the abolitionists that are just like, we got to actually pass some laws. What I will say with the laws though is, probably the most lagging thing Ron DeSantis has done is the 15-week ban down in Florida. I'm not impressed with 15-week bans when Texas is putting out heartbeat bills. So that's where the incremental approach
goes wrong. The problem in Florida is his legislature sucks.
True.
He is pulling his legislature up. And they probably had other motivations to crack down on Disney. But otherwise, his legislature is the weak part of his thing.
But
this is a legislature that caved on gun rights after Parkland. This is that type of legislature. They're not a solid conservative legislature. And Rick Scott became senator after doing so as well. But I would agree with the statement that abolitionists probably got the pro-life movement moving along, because we raised the bar. If you look at Oklahoma signed a pretty strong bill, didn't they?
Yeah, and I think they might even have a trigger bill. So
are you familiar with the Free the States movement?
So sure.
They've occasionally been published on Protestia, but I think their main guys are based out of Oklahoma. So they publish stuff on the Oklahoma movement a long time. They've been doing that focus on Oklahoma, and it looks like they're finally getting some major success here. McConnell will be like, I've been preparing to overthrow Roe for 30 years. Who's the rhino now?
Still him.
Still him.
I mean, I'm not going to say he's not a transactional guy. He knows how to make a good deal for himself, not necessarily his
I
voters.
mean, we can easily fall into the trap of giving him so much credit. Like, it really should have been super easy for Republicans not to vote on Merrick Garland. Like, that was simple political expedientism that Republicans have been lacking for decades, and he just decided that now is the time to be politically expedient and dust off a play in the playbook of normal politics. And we want to give him credit as a hero for that, which I don't agree with. So let's do one last thing, and you're going to be interested in this source here.
This one I don't actually know.
No, you don't know this one. So this is called Middle Ground, and it's a thing by Jubilee. It's a pop culture thing. It's got 2 million views, almost 7.2 million subs, and this is a thing on abortion. So we're gonna actually play this clip and watch this. I want your take. I'm not gonna tell you what goes on in this take in this clip, but you're gonna watch.
Abortion is murder.
Okay, so there's 4 people that are pro-abortion, 4 people that are anti-abortion. So the people on the left are the pro-aborts, and these are supposedly the pro-lifers.
So they don't
listen to what they're going to say. So obviously they step forward in agreement with the statement because they're on the pro-life side. But let's actually listen to them.
I think it is murder. I think for the abortionist more so than the woman. I think a lot of women don't necessarily know exactly how an abortion procedure is formed. I've had a girl even tell me that at 20 weeks a baby is just a clump of cells, and that's just not true. I do believe that there might be cases where some women might be unaware of what's going on in an abortion. But by and large, I think, especially with the advent of the internet and so much education out there, many of them do know that there's a life inside of them, and they want to end that life, whether they call it murder or not.
Hard disagree. Absolutely disagree.
Okay.
I've definitely met a lot of teenage girls who grew up in our generation who believe that abortion is normal, a fetus is a clump of cells, and there is no human life in the womb. They don't tell you when you go in for an abortion consultation, this is a child, and this is a...
Sorry. There's a detail that I want to point out. Did you catch her necklace?
Probably not. I'm not a pervert, so I wasn't staring in that direction.
You didn't catch her necklace?
No.
Sorry, David.
Oh,
Just saying. Are we not allowed to call that out?
It's a human life, and that's what's going to be happening. I have a hard time believing that if most women knew they were killing a child, they would do that. I don't think women in America are that malevolent. I think it's very irresponsible and very hurtful to say, oh, this woman's a murderer because she had an abortion.
Okay, so what do you think of her fresh take?
I mean, it seems like it seems more like someone that's reciting someone else's talking points than...
No, I think that was pretty original. But... How dare you call women who get abortion murderer? That is so hurtful.
Like a Greta Thunberg approach.
What's with the necklace? It was a Jewish star. So she's Jewish, which just explains why she has a godless ideology when it comes to understanding the relationship between mankind and sin and their accountability to God and morality. That's why I point that out. I didn't catch that the first 2 I've seen this like 3 times. This would be my 3rd time saying that. But then the other thing is there's no real meaning on what it means to be Jewish. So it's basically like that's basically her way of saying that I'm not coming at this from a moral argument whatsoever, because that's her framework. You saw her framework was completely, women can't not possibly be that malevolent. Would you say the same thing about men? Answer that one.
I mean, she'll say rape culture is a thing. So.
Like Yeah, I don't want to violate Godwin's law here, but is there any person that would say that no man can possibly be that evil?
No, because they used to add Hitler homonyms.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. She sounds like she'd be the type of person screaming literally Hitler at everything, just because she's completely liberal. But Paul says the best argument against abortion is in the Jewish scriptures. Yes, that's the ironic thing, but again, we actually have to believe them, which even Ben Shapiro does not actually believe the Jewish scriptures because he does not believe in the Old Testament miracles. So, again, good luck, because it's always going to be a humanist argument of whether something's good for mankind, whether something's practical, or maybe a Kantian argument where you're doing like the universal test. I'm not a philosophy guy, but Kant had that thing where you test whether something's moral or not by extrapolating it across all of mankind, everyone committing the same act, and measuring what the results would be, which isn't a terrible test for someone who is objectively an atheist, but obviously has its weaknesses. So watch this part, though. This is where things get a little bit spicy.
At least my personal experience, the people who worked there were very understanding. They let me know there is a child that could come out of you in 9 months. Are you sure you want to do this? I knew there was a child in my body. I knew I could have a child in 9 months, and I knew that child can grow old and be their own person. But I made that choice because I am allowed to have that choice, and especially you. You are a white man, and you are not allowed to say what I can do with my body, nor any of these other women who are able to carry a child.
I think that's so dangerous. I think that's so dangerous to say that you can't say because of your sexuality.
Did you expect it going in that direction?
I mean, I kind of like how she basically acknowledged, yeah, I knew what I was doing the entire time. And that's like, you have the pro-life side saying, I didn't know, they don't know what they're doing. They're acting in ignorant. It's a clump of cell. And then you have, a racist, white man hating, feminist, black woman going, oh, I knew it could be a child that could grow up. I just didn't want it. And you can't tell me what I can and can't do. So there was a lot more defiance.
Absolutely wrecked. Like, did Jewish girl not get absolutely wrecked there?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, stating.
Like, yeah, I knew.
It's like trying to give your opponent the benefit of the doubt, and then they're just like, no, I don't need that. I
ordered the code.
Yeah. You can't handle the truth, and
Yeah. So let's just finish up this section because, again, it now they're getting into like intersectionality and stuff like that.
Who you are as a male or female, or how you believe as a religion, you can't define what's right or wrong. I think that's misguided.
You can
and
have
we
your
shouldn't
own
take that
opinion.
into policy.
I think what she's
If it's a
saying is
child,
that
you should have
whatever
that right.
your morality is, I think that folks are entitled, that we have freedom of religion, we have freedom from religion. Whatever your moral value is, the issue is trying to turn that into legislation and putting it on someone else.
We legislate what's right or wrong all the time.
Thinking even medically, like for Indigenous women, they're 2 times as likely to die from pregnancy-related complications. Who's responsible for that murder if she's forced to carry that baby?
Well, I would be all for working on legislation altogether, where if the woman's been taken advantage of, or if they've incest situations, or if her life's at risk, we can keep those options on the table.
So all of a sudden, because she could potentially die, we'll make legislation where she can't abort that baby, and all of a sudden you're pro-abortion?
No, I'm not pro-abortion. I personally would not like her to choose that option. I think science
So
is coming.
No.
Okay, you see what's going on now?
Well, I like how they're trying to do the compromise. And let me just say, Rocky is such an appropriate name for that one girl giving her mug. But
I mean, these are some pretty terrible pro-life arguments.
And let me just say, like, even in the American tradition, like, again, going back to what Alito cites in his decision, the older laws restricting abortion actually, I guess, made exception for life of the mother, which again is a vague stance, which it's hard for me to even conceptualize, because life of the mother could be a gunshot wound, it could be nerve damage to the back, it could be a car accident, it could be cancer. I mean,
Okay,
it's
so
impossible to make a judgment decision because
let's
life of the mother is
or
too
mother's
broad.
health is even more broad, right? Mother's health is oftentimes how it might be worded, and that's even more broad. For example, like, my wife had a rough 2 pregnancies. So 2 very rough pregnancies, and you could easily see how in our abortion convenient society that if you're a liberal and had to go through half of what my wife had to go through, they would just execute out of convenience for health reasons. Which, yeah, there were some health complications, but that's still not a reason to kill. And just to consider that an option, as though that's like mother's health has such a broad spectrum of what it could include that first of all, it needs to be life threatening, or not even just life threatening, but like beyond life threatening. Because you could say something's threatening to my mental health, and I might off myself, and I don't think that would be sufficient. So just to just give my wife credit here, because she went through a lot. Obviously, abortion didn't even come to mind because we're both believers and we're decent people. But the idea that mother's health is such a broad spectrum, and I think as a movement we need to be wise to that. We
I
need
just
to be
think we
wise
should.
to the fact that they can, someone could consider hyperemesis a reason to abort a baby. Someone could consider preeclampsia a reason to abort a baby, or kidney stones, gallstones.
I just think it's too broad of it's like, why even bring it up in a conversation, because it's too broad, because it's hard to define. And again, I'm talking about legitimate.
Wrong a lot.
I'm talking about legitimate cases of life threatening, not like
I'm
depressed.
Yeah, right. And I don't think people quite think that out, because if you look at like the Guttmacher stats, they don't really.
I think they even say it's like 0.0.
Yeah, it's like we're talking under 8%, right? But if you look at
under
Guttmacher
0.1%,
the percentage of mother's health, what happens when you break down that percentage, which is already a small percentage? What happens if you break that percentage down by what the health concern is? It could just be morning sickness. So let's just finish up this woke nonsense, because it's hilarious to me.
I think science has come a long way with that. That's vastly not the case anymore within our medical community, and we need to continue to increase funding for those mechanisms to provide more research on how to keep the woman alive in a situation.
What is the end goal here, that abortion be illegal and it be criminalized and removed as a resource forever from this country? Is that the
illegal and unthinkable?
Illegal and unthinkable. So it is culturally
for women. We want women to have resources, first of all, where they don't need an abortion, and then abortion for the abortionist is criminalized. So an abortionist could go to jail for performing it. Women should not be criminalized, because at the end of the day, women are victims of abortion as well.
See, you see how insufficient that is, and that's the end of the clip.
And again goes back to what Sassy Black Woman said, which was the exact opposite. It's just like, I know what I'm doing. It's my choice, and I'm going to execute it. I have the right of refusal, and I'm going to execute my options. So, I mean, again.
And have you ever seen someone lose a pro-life argument?
On the life question? No.
Which is very hard to do.
I mean,
because
even
they don't have a clear position, because oftentimes they won't be clear. Like, oftentimes they won't, you just take things to the logical conclusion. They want abortion on demand. They don't really want restrictions, because they don't want to define when a life begins. But honestly, they only really have 2 standards for if a life is a life or not. One, either the child is born, unless you're Ralph Northam down in Virginia. The second one is if the mother wants it. That's what determines if it's a life or not.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the money lines in the article is the lesson from his segments, and his being Crowder's, is not that compromises can be made, but that the logical implications of pro-infanticide will always devolve to at least one of the following. Point 1, the mother determines when life begins. Or 2, the needs of the mother outweigh that of the child.
Which is a very utilitarian argument.
No, it's not utilitarian because it's only applying to the individuals, not society.
Well,
I've never seen someone on Crowder make the argument that society would benefit if this child is not born because said child would be a detriment to the society as a whole above the norm of like a Down syndrome type, which again was what Iceland, like a country like Iceland does, where they abort all the Down syndrome babies.
and it's interesting
under
how
their-
incest is brought up. Like they're so caught up on incest, except because incest, I guess, and
I
that's
think that was-
eugenics, by the way. Like incest exceptions to abortion are purely eugenics.
I think that's even smaller than life of the mother.
Yeah, it's the smallest category. And yet, like, if you look at, but it's too politically inconvenient to say Down syndrome or other birth defects, which, if you're a eugenicist, and I'm not a eugenicist, but if you are a eugenicist, would not incest be lower on the totem pole of severity than something like Down syndrome or any other chromosomal disorder? If you're a eugenicist and want to be honest about it, you would prioritize aborting those babies and not the inbred babies that might have like a Habsburg chin or whatever it's called.
Well, but it is ironic that's at least their one argument where there's a net. There is not net, but there is a positive. One might say a positive utilitarian argument that could be made. Of course, it doesn't answer the life question.
Pedro, I'm surprised you can even say that in the chat. Props to you. But yeah, and it's true. Like in Iceland, they do it 100%. Like it's something really brutal, and then they act like they're in an elite society because they get rid of that. So,
but I mean, I've never actually seen someone on Crowder articulate that point, which again, to me, that is their strongest argument. If you were to play devil's advocate, that would be the strongest argument.
Be pro eugenics and openly so?
I guess, because at least you're making an objective case that, let's say, the burden that's placed on the mother is above average for that of another child, and it's a burden on society as a whole. One could make that argument. Again, playing devil's advocate, not saying abort the children, the defected children. Not saying that, but that is their strongest argument. Otherwise, it is just the mother determines when life begins, or 2, the needs of the mother outweigh that of the child. And that happens on every one of Crowder's Change My Minds, is you get down to the root arguments. And it might take 40 minutes to get down to their root arguments, but they always will get down to one of those 2 arguments on his pro-life Change My Minds. They'll all say it. It's just a matter of how long it takes.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it will always come down to it's not a life because a mother doesn't want it to be a life, or it doesn't matter that it's a life because the mother doesn't want it. So it's about desire, which is a terrible standard that could change any day, or it's born. So birth, and again, unless you're Ralph Northam, you just put it on the table and then decide whether you want to keep it or not. You just have a decision, nice long conversation while a child is crying on a dishpan or whatever.
Going back to Roman times, you decide whether you want to claim it or not.
Yeah. So we'll take some questions here as we're wrapping up, because we don't have that much more to discuss. I think we thoroughly crushed the Steven Crowder's arguments. And again, this was meant to be a polemic. So submit your questions while I go off a little bit. This is meant to be a polemic. It is meant to be a friendly. First of all, we didn't fire the first shot here because Steven Crowder assumed that our position didn't exist. He assumed that the biblical standard for abortion does not exist, and that hurts the movement. When you say that the logical conclusion of a movement does not exist. So that's not a good idea.
Well, one thing I do want to make sure I bring up is at the end of the article, I do bring up how, like, plenty on the right made noise over Disney's child grooming, vowing boycotts, but will they take the fight to Apple, Amazon, Salesforce, Uber, Lyft, Citigroup, and others that have vowed to fund transportation across state lines?
You know what I think is the
So-
more effective strategy on those companies? Make
So
them
it's-
pay even more. Make it more expensive. Like Amazon was like, what, $4,000? The response to me should be, let's make it cost $8,000. Let's make it cost $12,000. Let's keep making it more and more expensive, more and more difficult. See how many people actually want to go through with that. See how many companies are actually, once they add up the cost, see how much they want to continue doing it. When, a company like Amazon probably will, because they make money hand over fist.
I mean,
and I don't really think there's a way to defeat Amazon unless you're going to be Walmart.
I mean, if we're going
the
back
only way
to
to defeat Amazon is through Walmart, because they basically copied Amazon on their online website and have local distribution.
Wait, if we're going back to like the heartbeat law, where you can't sue the women for civil damages, but you can sue anyone else. Again, I'm not necessarily saying go ahead and sue the women, because I'd rather go after the people with deeper pockets, which would be these large corporations, if they are indeed aiding and abetting. You took the, let's say, the bus company, the public transport option, or subsidized transport option, or you took the Uber, sue Uber instead. And under the Texas law, you could actually do that.
Yeah, I think private enforcement mechanisms play a huge role in, it doesn't matter. If we just do criminalization and private enforcement mechanisms, then that's how you take out Amazon. That's how you do it. And eventually we're going to see the next Supreme Court case on abortion, assuming that this ruling stands, will be an interstate law, will be interstate. Wouldn't you agree?
It's hard to say, because you might actually have a case where, even though the Supreme Court declares, let's say the Supreme Court overrules Roe, then you'll have another court that'll be like, hey, we don't care what you did. We're just going to strike down the abortion law. And then the other case that could come up, which
what abortion law?
Let's say a state passes an abortion law and a federal circuit says, no, we're striking it down, even though, the Supreme Court said what it said. So that might be a case that comes up. Another option, which I don't think this will rise to the Supreme Court, but in a state like Wisconsin or Michigan, where they have laws in the book, so someone's got to essentially sue the state AG, or maybe the state AG sues there might be a lawsuit in order to make that law a law again. So
I could see something like that, but I don't know if that would make it to the Supreme Court.
I don't think it would. No,
if anything, you should actually do that in your own state court.
Yeah, the Supreme Court probably won't, but
if you look at Judicial Watch fighting in Maryland for the congressional mapping, they fought in the state court, and that was an extremely successful strategy.
But I mean, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I think, overturned a lot of the masking and emergency measures. So that could be,
exactly.
It might be the Wisconsin Supreme Court that enforces their decades-old abortion law once again. So that might be another court battle. Again, there's going to be a lot of court battles and legislative battles going on between this and November.
But I see interstate commerce.
Yeah, interstate commerce could.
That will be the next major fight on abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. We'll have a bunch of states where abortion is illegal, but what about extradition? That'll be a fight. What about if you're a resident of Mississippi, but you go to New York for an abortion? Can Mississippi then prosecute you, which I believe they do have the ability to do that, because you did commit an act. You are a resident of that state, so you are subject to their jurisdiction thereof. But it's kind of the same thing. Like, America will prosecute you if you go and rape someone overseas. You come back to the United States, you can face prosecution for doing that overseas. Even the country doesn't prosecute you for that. That's American law. Or if you're bribing officials in other countries, you can face criminal penalties for that, even though it takes place in other countries. The only bribery that American government legalizes in other countries, if you're doing grease payments,
hush payments,
to expedite filing fees and processing. you can pay a grease payment, which is a bribe, in order to speed along a process. You're allowed to do that, but you can't just, bribe a politician or a police officer to not inspect a plant or whatever. Like, you can't do that. That's illegal. So there is precedent for America having, internationally, there is a precedent for America prosecuting people for what they do in other countries. Can that be applied to state on the basis of abortion or murder?
I mean, certainly with Texas, they have the law. I mean, again, you don't just, teleport into another state. You have to take a bus, a train. So again, where Texas, you might not be able to go after the mother, but you can certainly go after the service provider. Especially if it's, expressly
you can only
for
go after
said
them
purpose.
civilly.
Yes.
I don't think you can go after them criminally, even if Texas manages to ban abortion. I think they have a trigger law. So if you have a trigger law, assuming abortion's illegal, and let's assume that it's criminalized, which is the ultimate goal of this movement, is to criminalize it, you're going to have a situation where interstate, and when you cross state lines, which is why a federal law could actually be very effective on this. Man, what's that compromise from, like, the compromise of 1850, where, it's kind of like the response to Dred Scott or something like that. But you're going to see something like that as you have, like, baby murder states versus not, life states. You're going to see a divide like that, and maybe federal legislation to kind of mediate the division between those two states.
Part of why the Democrats wanted to do this, they might give them the leverage to overturn the filibuster, and then they could pass a federal law. Again, that's more of a long shot, but if they were to make a resurgence towards overturning the filibuster, this might be the issue, because obviously H.R. 1 and DC statehood is not going to be it.
I don't get how the Republicans do so badly in Senate elections.
Dr. Oz, David McCormick.
But I guess where I'm going with this is that at most, after this 2022 cycle, the Republicans will only have 54 senators at most. And I'm giving New Hampshire to the Republicans. And, so there is, like, no possibility of getting to that 60 vote threshold because of how badly the Republicans perform in senatorial elections to even get anything passed in Congress. It's very more likely in the House, where there could be like a 40 seat plus swing, and you can get a threat. I think you only need a majority threshold in the House, but you need 60 votes in the Senate to do anything. And then you already have like 3 pro-abortion Republican senators.
Then 4 if you include Pennsylvania.
If Dr. Oz gets elected, you'll have 4.
McCormick too. So.
McCormick.
Yes, he's a globalist. He's bad.
Who is that? The black lady senator,
Kathy Barnett.
Kathy. Yes, I see a lot of support for her online, because apparently Trump was doing a rally in Pennsylvania today, and people were talking about booing Dr. Oz because Dr. Oz was supposed to be there. So we'll see if that comes into fruition.
But I think she was polling 3rd or 4th. So again, she'd be, or no, 4th or 5th. But yeah, she's the only one I would really support.
Okay, Paul says Barnett is gaining.
She's endorsed by Mastriano, who is a Christian nationalist running for governor.
Based. And we respect our Christian nationalism. Russell Moore wrote in his most recent article that came out today that Christian nationalism is a real threat. Okay, Paul says that Barnett is top 3. So
I mean, I know when I wrote on it, she wasn't.
Okay, so she definitely probably has some momentum here. Is that enough? Because, again, I think Trump doing a rally for Dr. Oz doesn't hurt Dr. Oz. Unless he gets booed at that rally severely, that'll hurt.
Well, I mean, McCormick, I think, is up. The problem is, will Dr. Oz's support just go to McCormick instead? So
I think we're about to head out. I don't see any questions for the...
I thought there was one on incrementalism earlier.
We kind of talked about that, I thought. I mean, there's some discussion about Russia's relationship with abortion, which I kind of think both sides are kind of right on that. Yes, there is a lot of abortions in Russia, but also they see that it's a problem.
No, they
I
now
think
see,
both are
well,
true.
I guess the Putin era sees it as a problem versus the Soviet era.
Well, yeah,
It
it's
was
going to
ingrained. It's kind of
demographically kill your country. So it's bad policy. And then here's where it gets really cynical, is that you bring in a bunch of immigrants to replace your native population, and then you demographically extinguish your majority population and create left-wing voting blocks of immigrant populations, and
Jeez,
then
don't spoil my next
in
article.
power. Oh, wow. I didn't know you were talking about. Where's Larry Hogan on abortion? Do you know the answer to that question?
I mean, again, he'll veto the abortion legislation. I mean, keep in mind, Maryland's has 9-month abortion as it is, and I think that predates Hogan. So, I mean, Maryland hasn't really passed a whole lot of abortion legislation because we already had it in place.
So, yeah, I think Larry Hogan will veto. For instance, Democrats have been really plotting to advance the goal, score another touchdown on the issue of abortion in Maryland. They want to codify it into the Maryland Constitution, or Maryland Declaration of Rights, I think is a more proper name for it. They want to codify it there, which would be a ballot issue. And they recently, and I believe Larry Hogan vetoed this, but he could have done so for fiscal reasons. And that is, they recently passed a thing where the state, meaning the taxpayer, has to pay for now an expanded list of medical professions that can now perform abortion. So like nurse practitioners and more doctors and midwives can now be trained in performing an abortion at the taxpayer dime in Maryland. I believe Larry Hogan vetoed that.
He vetoed it, but it was overridden anyway.
Again, you could have vetoed it because, it costs too much.
Didn't veto the gun legislation that passed through on the ghost guns.
Are you banning ghost guns in Maryland?
He didn't veto it.
Which means he passed it. So I'm going to flip the question back. Larry Hogan, if you were to pass a heartbeat bill in the Maryland legislature, let's pretend that Maryland has a Republican-controlled legislature. If you passed a heartbeat bill, he would not sign it. That's where I think he is on this bill. He is to the left of John Kasich. And Kasich, the governor of Ohio, who ran for president in 2016, fake Christian because he went to gay weddings and also vetoed pro-life legislation, which I think Kevin DeWine, or is it Mike DeWine? He would actually sign that same legislation that John Kasich, who now I think works at either CNN or MSNBC, he vetoed it. So I think that's where Larry Hogan is. He would veto it. So I think that's all we got for today.
Do the one question.
Well, what's the one question?
I guess Thomas on.
I asked if y'all were in favor of incrementalism over immediatism, or vice versa.
I guess the answer comes down to advancing the ball, not just doing a lateral pass. Like, again, Florida, like Mississippi passing a 15-week ban is making ground. That's making a deep pass. You're going downfield. Florida passing that same law is lateral. You're not making any ground, versus Texas passing a heartbeat bill is making a deep pass. So again, are you trying to advance the ball, or are you just trying to run a play out? So I think that's it goes back to motivation on whether incrementalism is inherently bad or good. But again, are you trying to advance the ball, or are you trying to not? Because again, I mean, we might not be able to, in our lifetime, overturn Obergefell, but are we going to advance the ball towards that goal?
Yeah, I would agree with that. In Maryland, if we could get a 20-week ban passed, that would still allow people to get abortion for the first 20 weeks of pregnancy. But there's no reason to oppose that, because we're in such a deep blue state that it would be a miracle to even get that far in the first place. So you take the win if it's a win. However, what we see in a lot of other states, and this is where immediatism and incrementalism really clash, is that incrementalism is used to beat down the immediatist. That's what you see in a lot of these deep red states where they have Republican trifectas, but can't pass a simple heartbeat bill or a life begins at conception bill because these other people want to fundraise and let's only do 15 weeks. Let's only do 20 weeks. Let's do
Like if you're doing the 15 week,
liability.
if you're doing the 15-week bill over the heartbeat bill, which might be a case in Florida, might have been a case in maybe like Kentucky or some of these other states, then yeah, I mean, that's where incrementalism is inherently bad. Again, I'm judging by the motivation, not necessarily the outcome.
Right.
So that's where I think the problem is. But again, are you trying to break, like Texas broke new ground with their heartbeat bill? So I'm not going to condemn that, even though one might call that incrementalism.
They advanced the ball in a state that has a lot of abortion. There are a lot of abortions.
I mean, they reduced the count by 55% compared to the yearly average. And again, 55%. If you gain 55 yards on a play, you're doing pretty well in your offense. So again, you still got to get to the end zone, but you actually advance the ball. You're closer to your goal. You're not just throwing a screen that gets tackled at the line of scrimmage.
And what we need to realize on the right is that politics is a game of field position, right? It is field position. And, one of the arguments that I make in Maryland is that Larry Hogan did not advance the ball for Republicans in Maryland. He actually hurt our cause. He did not advance the ball. There are the state trended to the left while he was in office for 8 years, and that's not advancing the ball. Whereas you see Ron DeSantis is turning Florida into one of the reddest states in the country, not because of the Republican advantage, but because of their governance. That they're governing like, why don't you hear any major pro-life wins out of Wyoming, which is like one of the most stereotypically Republican states in the country? Why don't you hear about that? It's because these incrementalists probably are inhibiting the ability for meaningful legislation that a Republican trifecta state could easily accomplish. So I would also follow up and say I don't think incrementalism necessarily sends you to hell. But
again, it goes back to motivation versus.
Yeah, it does go back to motivation, and sinful motivations do send you to hell because your sin sends you to hell. So, how about you plug yourself, and then I'll plug myself.
Yeah, I got a couple articles coming up. A lot of the stuff I'm working on is actually longer stuff. So this was the shorter article in between a bunch of long stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, I got the Base Manifesto following up to the Anti-Feminist Manifesto. And then I got something on RFK coming up. So that should be fun.
We might have to do a stream on the RFK book because you read that and tell us your findings.
Yeah, if
YouTube will allow that, or even Twitter. I think we're still up on Twitter since we're giving that a try. And Evangelical Dark Web, you can support us over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's a financial way. We got multiple Patreon-like tiers that come with their own rewards. But the RSS feed is free. So sign up for that email list. You get the emails in your inbox every day, almost. And that's all we got for today. Like the video. Also subscribe to the channel. That's the least you can do. And we will catch you on the next one. Dragonborn. Where's that from? That one?